CED's 2024 fall semester lecture series. Before I present Dr. Fernandez this evening, I would like to just mention, please mark your calendars for Friday, November 22nd at 4:30 for Dr. Sung Kyung Lee, who I think, did she come in here? Is she here? Oh, there. Oh, there she is. Oh, she's behind. Okay. So she will be doing a lecture here also titled Cultivating Modernity, Public Parks in 19th Century Korea. So please mark your calendars for that and plan on attending. But tonight we have Dr. Fernandez, who will be presenting The Power of Perception, Understanding Urban Design and the Human Mind Through Virtual Reality. Dr. Fernandez received her bachelor's in science in environmental design and her MLA from Auburn. And then she went on to get her PhD at Clemson in planning design and the built environment. She began teaching a variety of classes here in 2019, including beginning design, graphics, advanced computer graphics, portfolio, capstone, graduate studio, variety of classes, so we're glad to have her here. Her research interests include utilizing emerging media for progressive landscape architectural design and communication strategies, using big data as a tool for understanding placemaking and community improvement, and campus planning and urban design as they relate to human experience and social sustainability. She is also a licensed landscape architect, campus planner, and lead AP in neighborhood development. So I would like for all of us to welcome Dr. Fernandez, Jessica Fernandez.
Okay, thank you so much for having me today. Super excited to see so many new faces. So out of curiosity, how many people in here are landscape architecture students at some level? Okay, how about urban design? Okay, what is this, where are you all? What are you all studying? Historic preservation, yes, okay, great. All right, wonderful, I'm curious, yeah, who I have in the crowd. So today, my lecture is going to be set in urban settings or campus settings, but I wanted to tie in the landscape because I'm currently teaching planting design studios and have some of those students here. And so it's going to be a bit of a mix, just so that you are aware. I'll come at you from a few different angles, but I'm excited to present on the power of perception, understanding urban design, and the human mind through virtual reality. So my research is mostly at the intersection of landscape architecture, environmental psychology, human health and well-being, and then also technology. So I'm really interested in how we can design spaces that maximize the benefits that people receive from them. I do this through emerging methods, including virtual reality and big data. So the last time I presented for the CED, I was actually presenting on a different type of research, but it was the same research theme. Today I'm focusing on virtual reality and specifically my graduate students' research that is coming out of the lab with virtual reality. VR is a technology that is becoming increasingly commonplace. People are starting to get VR headsets in their living rooms. It's kind of a gaming device. It's also expected to expand in the field of landscape architecture. In other programs, in academic settings, landscape architecture researchers are using it for site design, for example, in their classrooms, rapid design assessment, spatial evaluation, virtual site visits, which I actually did with students who were home during the COVID-19 pandemic, and then cultural interpretation. But there are many gaps in areas where VR is not being used in landscape architecture, and I'm specifically interested in design research with this tool. So today I'm going to start with some background on the lab that I have here with the College of Environment and Design, and then I'm going to talk about as mentioned, several student-led projects. And the reason that I'm interested in sharing student projects today is because the way that I work with my graduate students, our research becomes very integrated. I usually serve as the principal investigator on these studies because it is human subjects research. And so we have to go through all sorts of safety measures to make sure that we're treating people safely and appropriately, especially when you're working with virtual reality. So there's a lot of overlap, and we usually end up publishing or presenting these studies. So it's interesting because it's a very integrated process. So I'll start with talking a little bit about the RED Lab. And the RED Lab stands for Relationships in Environment and Design Lab. So I'm people-focused. I'm interested in how people interact with environments and how the environments affect people. So I founded this lab in 2022, and it actually began as a dream to have VR headsets where people could openly use them, and I quickly understood the challenges of that in an academic environment, but also through that process found my calling for this type of research. So I currently advise both master's and doctoral level students that use and study my area of expertise. I mentioned environmental psychology, I mentioned health, these things that I'm interested in, specifically using technology to study those areas. So why virtual reality? Why is this important? It can do a lot of things for us, but with my research, it's been shown to evoke similar emotional and physiological responses to if you are in the real world. And so it's not quite there, and we'll talk about that with limitations. In fact, it's a far cry from being there, but it is a tool that gets us closer than a lot of other research methods to real life environments, except for we can manipulate them a lot less expensively and a lot quicker, okay? So there's a lot of benefits to using this as a tool. In the lab, we have about 1,000 square feet of space. My graduate students tend to spend a lot of time down here, but we also have a few classes that are going to be using the space this semester and next semester for teaching and project reasons. So I'm really excited about that. But this space has really become a community where people have to support one another's ideas. I see a few giggles. Yes, this picture is from, I think, last week when I had a class in there, so you may see yourself. Had to pull, I don't take a lot of pictures. But, it's exciting to see people's ideas come to life and to see people really have ownership and find different paths of how to use this equipment and how to use it in really what I think are powerful ways. So we have a number of computers and extended reality equipment down there. I would say that we also use a variety of programs for different reasons. And so two of these programs, Twinmotion and then Lumion 360 imagery that comes out of that program, I teach in my advanced graphics class here. So a lot of the students that will engage with the lab that have taken that class are kind of prepared to engage with these programs. The lab currently has 6 active student members that I am advising, and then we've had 5 graduate since this lab started. So we've seen a large number of students come through here with those 5 successfully executing studies using virtual reality. And today I'm going to talk about 2 of their studies. So I won't have you sit here through all 5, but I am going to highlight the study of 2 actually Master of Landscape Architecture students. This is Madeline Kennebrew and Savannah Alexander, who actually just recently graduated. I chose these top 2 studies shown in red based on their common theme of looking at aspects of planting design in urban and campus environments. And again, teaching planting design studios right now, so planting design is at the forefront of my mind. So these are the 2 that I will cover, but I did want to show the extent of studies that have come through here and just give a little hint at what they were looking at with this imagery. The first project I'm going to share was recently completed in the lab, as mentioned by Master of Landscape Architecture student Savannah Alexander. The study was on natural planting and perceived restoration in the urban landscape. And it was really rewarding to see the students' ideas come together and come to life. Massive amounts of research stress the importance of having vegetation present in urban settings. This is for mental health and well-being and a variety of other aspects that affect people and the environment, okay? One effect of having greenery and vegetation in urban environments is restorativeness. It's restorative to people. And so when I say that, I mean something that makes a person feel healthier, they feel stronger, they feel more cheerful, they are able to bounce back from the stressors of day-to-day or other challenges in life. One problem that we have is that what we know is that greenery helps people, but we don't know a lot about what that means. If we design things in different ways, does it matter? Does it just matter that we have plants there? Or does it matter how the layout of those plants is shown to people and how people experience a site? And so Savannah was really specifically interested in how we are starting to have more wild planting designs, and she wanted to know the effect of that naturalness on levels of restorativeness that people receive. Savannah's research questions generally asked about varying levels of naturalness in planting design and how they affect or relate to the restorativeness that people feel. She was also pioneering the use of VR in this context, and so she really wanted to understand and explore the benefits of that as well. Savannah brought 75 UGA students, faculty, and staff, and this was not limited to the College of Environment and Design, although, as you can imagine, we mostly got College of Environment and Design students. But she actually went broader and brought in a lot of people from other areas as well through the Red Lab, which is downstairs, to test her research questions. So you can see her research design here, where she really brought people in to have an experience in one of these environments, right? And I will talk about those environments in a moment. She then gave them a survey, and then that was the data that she used to determine her research questions. The survey included 2 measures. If you're familiar with measures, it's really what information she is trying to get out of the people taking the survey. So she measured perceived naturalness. How natural do they think that this environment is, using a scale that has already been tested. And also, she used the perceived restorativeness scale. And the interesting thing about the perceived restorativeness scale is that it has 4 kind of subscales in it, 4 facets that make up restorativeness. So for this particular scale, being away, extent, compatibility, and fascination were all aspects that she could also understand by using this method. So one of the biggest challenges that Savannah faced was actually being able to say what's natural and what's not natural, right? You can't just make it up in a research study. We can look through books, we can look at pictures, but she needed a more systematic approach to understanding and even defining naturalness. And this is one of the main things that came out of the study even is her ability to go through the literature and understand what that meant. So for this study, naturalness can mean a lot of things, so I'm going to give it a lens. For this study, landscape naturalness was defined specifically as nature mimicking or nature-inspired design based on the local area. So here, it would be southeastern, like plantings. So she came up with 3 levels of naturalness. This was low, medium, and high, which I will go into a little bit more. So for low naturalness, if you can see this, the plants were blocked by species. They were cleanly sculpted, they were geometric shapes with minimal variety. Medium naturalness, we kind of became less sculpted, less geometric shapes. There was an increase in variability compared to the original low naturalness, but there was still some blocking in here. You can see some massings of these plantings, and then some variation of these high and low plants. And finally, high naturalness. So there was a notable vertical and horizontal mixing of plants compared to the medium and low environments. Okay? there's a blended edge, so you can see plants kind of coming off of that edge. Okay, it's a little bit less manicured of a look. And there's really no geometry, unlike the medium and low environments. All right, and I'm going to show you a video of, if you can see that, of what this environment looked like. So when people were actually taking the study, they were doing something called teleporting, which means there's a little blue bow that came out where they could go where they wanted. This is more of a movement through so that we don't jump you around the site too much when you're not in control of it. But you can kind of get an idea. Looks like this is that high naturalness environment. All right, so what came out of this study? Well, if you recall, the biggest thing that we wanted to know is if changing the plantings, the level of naturalness of the plantings in these environments actually affected people's perceived restorativeness. I hate to say that the answer was no. The answer was no, that it did not, and that's science for you, right? You have a question, and sometimes it surprises you. What was interesting, though, is that we also took measures on perceived naturalness. So naturalness means it was 1, 2, 3. I showed you the 3 environments. One was high, one was medium, one was low. We compared that to the perceived restorativeness. But perceived naturalness is they put, I think this is really natural, or I don't think this is really natural. And that was actually highly correlated with whether or not they had received restorativeness. So part of the title of this, I'm talking about perceptions, and it's because it's so fascinating to me how much is based upon how we perceive environments, right? And how we perceive, if they thought it was more natural, they were more restored. So I think that there's implications there. In addition, we had these 4 different facets of restorativeness: the being away, the extent, the compatibility, the fascination. So when you start looking at these were more strongly correlated in particular environments than they were in others. So being away was in the high natural environment. They experienced being away more, whereas fascination was in that more low naturalness environment. So this has implications for design. So what she ended up doing is kind of making recommendations based on this. So we're not talking good or bad. We're talking what effect may occur if you design things in a certain way. And this is preliminary. This is all kind of exploratory studies. So a lot more research would need to be done to prove this. But for example, high naturalness supports the feeling of being away. As I mentioned, this would allow people to disengage from day-to-day stressors. So if you're really looking for a place to kick back and like reduce that stress, then you might make a more natural environment. Low and medium natural environments may support higher fascination that captures the site user's attention and engages them. So if you want them not just sitting there chilling out, if you want them looking at the plants, you're probably going to do something that's a little lower naturalness. So there's a lot of implications, as you can see, and I'm not going to go through every one of them, but I think that this is important because as this research starts to trickle through, as we start to publish our findings, they start to make their way eventually into the industry. So we can think about, if I design it this way, people are going to maybe react in this way or feel this way, which again, I keep saying everything's fascinating to me, but it is. I find this stuff interesting. So suggestions from the research. What it really showed us, when we talk about perceptions, it showed us that it's important to engage with your stakeholders, to engage with the people that are going to be using environments when you design them and plan them, because conversations educate. If we want to design, for example, more natural environments for other reasons than what we're talking about here, if we want to involve environmental considerations, sustainability considerations. It's going to be important to have those conversations with people, but it also is going to affect how they actually perceive it and how they experience it. So I'd say community engagement is key, and we found not one size fits all. There's not a good or bad. It's if you do this, it might mean this. It's just very multifaceted, but we can be very purposeful as designers. Okay, on to the next study. This is Madeline Kennebrew's study, and she measured facets of landscape aesthetics related to people's perception of time. So she also looked at vegetation, but she did it in a very different way. Okay. Madeline was specifically interested in the experience of moving through a space and how site design can shape that. Okay, so you think about when we're learning how to design, we really focus on this, on when you go through a space, how does it feel? Is it opening? Is it closing? You know, all of these sorts of things that we purposefully design are what she was interested in, but she did it in a very specific way. So as we're talking about, designers make decisions which affect what people want to do on a site. Madeline was specifically interested in perceived time and motion through a landscape and what designers can do to think about that and to implement it into their designs. So to do this, she looked at the effect of coherence and complexity of planting designs as people move through a space. So what does that mean? Coherence is the level of organization and order. So do you have plants one after the other? Okay, that would be highly coherent. Complexity is the presence or lack of variety regarding plant species. So she based these, so do you have two plants or do you have 16 different varieties of plants? That's what we're talking about for this study when we're talking about complexity. So more specifically, Madeline wanted to know how the coherence and complexity of a planting design relates to site users' experience of place and time, and then also how this can inform design decisions. She created 4 VR environments with varying levels of coherence and complexity, and I will go more into this than this chart. Then she had different groups of people experience each environment, followed by focus group discussions. So basically, she had 4 people experience one environment, 4 different people experience another one, so on and so forth. And then she sat there with them for 30 minutes to an hour and really picked their brains about what they thought. She was really interested in performing a qualitative study. So she was going for in-depth information. She wasn't going for quantitative information. She wanted to engage with firsthand information, and that is how she did it. Okay, so here you can see those 4 environments as well as the path that she had study participants take in VR. So for this, we used a VR 360 video. So basically, people were not able to teleport around and go where they wanted. We controlled where they wanted to, where they had to go, and they went down a path. And I'll show you a video of that shortly. But the reason for that is because she wanted to understand their perception of time and motion. So we had to keep that steady, right? We had to control that so that we understood how it changed when they were moving through this path. Her method was based on previous methods that have been used with 2-dimensional things like pictures, okay? So people will often do these studies and they'll show people like 3 different pictures and say, okay, what do you think about this one? What do you think about this one? But one of the noted limitations in many of these studies is that it's not immersive, okay? So people aren't experiencing it. They're looking at a picture or they're looking at it, even a 3D model through a computer screen. So she was able to kind of take these concepts but apply them in an immersive VR environment. Okay. So this video is not what it looked like in VR. This is what it looks like when you export a 360-degree video. So when you're in this, it looks like you're moving down a path. Your path is set, whoops, and it's over. Your path is set, but you can look around. So you can look up, you can look behind you, you can look down. So you have control over the motion of your head, so you can see like a broader spectrum than what you would with imagery. You just can't move off the path, which is good. In other studies, we've had people like going to the top of the buildings and all sorts of, you know, whatever you can do in VR that you can't do in real life. All right, so for analyses, as mentioned, this was a qualitative study where she was looking for in-depth information. So she performed qualitative coding. She thematically coded each of those focus group discussions and kind of pulled the information out and saw what themes arose through that. And this had a level of intercoder reliability, which means she'd do it and then she'd ask, does this ring true? And go back and forth just to make sure that it's not just one person's perception of what she interpreted. To do this, she used in vivo software. And then what am I showing here? She also looked at word frequency. So how many words showed up in these different focus group discussions. And that just gave her something that actually kind of substantiated what she was pulling out of the information. From this, she deciphered people's perceptions in each setting. So both coherence and complexity were assessed against perceptions of time and how the site user wanted to experience the space. So what you're seeing is one example of the output of this. And she made several of these charts that studied these facets of coherence and complexity. But what's interesting is this is the effects of design complexity. So low complexity, time passed slowly for people. They said it went slow, right? They wanted to move more quickly, and they wanted to not be there as long. They wanted to stay shorter. So this is complexity, if you recall, is like the two plant species experience, okay? Then we have high complexity. That is the 12 species experience, and people thought that time passed quickly, all right? They wanted to move through more slowly. They wanted to stay and linger. So obviously this has design implications. She came up with different charts that took these themes and helped her to start to formulate design recommendations, all right? So these design recommendations were created for how designers might use particular combinations of coherence and complexity for certain user outcomes, right? What do you want people doing on a site? Well, then you can design it this way. Again, this is preliminary research, okay? This is exploratory. This needs to be followed up by further research. But the cool thing about it is that it was corroborated with existing literature. So the things that she found have been found in different studies before in different places, and it kind of pulled it together. So an example is a low coherence, high complexity environment might result in a place to linger. Users want to stay there for longer. It might be appropriate for a garden or campus path through a quad, maybe. On the other hand, a high coherence, low complexity environment, so very straight lined, less plant variety, would be appropriate for a direct path where you don't want people to stay. So you think about getting people into the stadium, right? Or getting people through airport parking or this sort of thing. There are appropriate designs, and it does not need all of the variety. You don't want people hanging out there. You want to direct them to move through while still having that vegetative experience. Ultimately, she determined that designers can influence site users' perceptions and possibly even behaviors differently through manipulation of the coherence and complexity of a planting design. So these findings, again, were corroborated with the literature out there and will be published soon. All right, there are a number of limitations to this research, okay? Limitations mean, like, what kept it back? I can say these things, but again, a lot more testing is needed. So with VR, you have limited senses that you're using. We have had a student come through that used smell in a VR study, so you can distinctly introduce the different things, right, the different senses, but it's an effort, okay? So here, this is just visual. She was experiencing it through all the students, and the people taking these studies were going through them using their vision. So it's not going to be the same as like being out on a site. You don't feel the wind on your face or the sun or the rain, okay? But there are benefits to that too, which I'll talk about in a minute. The novelty of the participants, the novelty factor was a big issue and can be a big issue where people may love something or hate it because they're not used to the tool, right? So to mitigate these effects, in most of these studies, we gave a little bit of time before and a little bit of time extra after, a little bit of extra time. In Madeline's video, the 360 video, it went through it twice, right? So that the first time is like, what am I doing? What is this? And then the second time, they can actually look at it, okay? So we do things to mitigate this, but it can still be an issue. The sample diversity is an issue. So that means that everybody was from UGA, right? So we can't really generalize these findings beyond people at UGA. And even then, we need to test it and test it and test it again. So sample diversity is an issue, and it would be great to do more expansive studies like this. Finally, future research could involve physiological data. And so basically, what's your heart rate doing? You know, what is your brain doing? Some VR studies combine physiological data with the perceptions, and these are limited to the perceptions. These studies are, I can't imagine putting a master's student through a more expansive study than the perceptions and the surveys, but we would like to do that in this lab, and the reason is because we can actually see what's happening in the body during these experiences and look at people's perceptions compared to that. It would strengthen the study, and this hasn't been done a lot in design research, especially with virtual reality. It has not been done a whole lot. So that's an area that could be expanded into. Finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about VR. As we try to get this research out into the world, people keep coming back with the real value of this study is that you're using this tool in a different way for a new area to find out new things. They're very focused on the tool itself. And so we have to kind of build this body to say, look, it can do certain things. What it can do for us, we're isolating design variables. So when you go through an environment, do you want to change just the planting? That's the example that we had today, to see the effect of that. You can turn this into a causal study, which means when this happens, right? So when we do this for design, right, maybe we can be better designers. We can design very intentionally for the things that we want people to do or the ways that we want people to feel. And this is particularly important for like health, right? Human health and restoration and, you know, whether or not they want to stay outside and receive those benefits from that landscape. So today I shared the way that we've manipulated vegetation. It's a very small part of environmental design, right? There's so many things that we can look at. But I'm really excited to explore the positive effects that our designs can have on people. So continuing to do that. And that's what I've got. Okay.